Hi there, and welcome to Vegan Island Radio, the show that's dedicated to artists, activists, and everyday people who are doing their bit to encourage others and bring about a vegan planet in their own special way. Today on the proverbial Vegan Island, I have with me Roger Yates. Roger is a long-time animal rights advocate, with a history that includes the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, the Animal Liberation Front, and the Fur Action Group. As co-founder, he now works with the Vegan Information Project, who describe themselves as intersectional vegan education unchained. Roger also once had a chance to try out for Leeds United back in the 70s, which at the time was one of the biggest clubs in Europe.
This is the story people don't want to know, about the horrors for the animals stolen from their own families, left to suffer and die all alone. Oh, headed prodded to another road train, bound for the slaughterhouse again and again. Innocent eyes peer through the bars. Do you eat and simply disregard? Oh, born alive, suffering is suffering. Blood is blood, pain is pain. Born to die. 2269. Fur, hair, leather, feathers, swim, run, or fly away. Animals are innocent casualties. No longer can we be silent for another day. Be the voice of the voiceless. Born alive, suffering is suffering. Blood is blood, pain is pain. Born to die too. 269.
How you doing, Roger? Welcome to the island.
Thanks a lot for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Tell me all about Leeds United then.
Yeah, well, I used to go and watch the Rev team, the famous team. I can still reel them off, Sprake, Reenie Cooper and all that. And I used to go and watch them. And then one of their players or scouts came to, we used to have an inter-street competition. I was in the big council estate, a place called Otley, which is 10 miles from Leeds. They came there and some of them were picked to have a trial. Or they just took our names. I remember I got a medal. I've still got it. Becoming runner-up in some competition. And then I'd moved to the Isle of Wight with my mother. She was a bingo manager. And suddenly we got this invite for me to go for a trial. But in the meantime, we were right down the other side of the country. And it was interesting because the people on the island didn't know much about professional football. And so I was a bit of a weird kind of mini celebrity because I'd actually been to Elland Road. And as you said, they were the massive team at the time. So I was able to teach the kids the chants from the stands and everything. And they thought that was marvelous. And also I had a problem with my knees at the time. I saw a specialist and I would have to have some specialist kind of operations on both knees. So it kind of never happened, but it was a possibility. I could have had a curly perm and be like Kevin Keegan, but never mind.
That's definitely a sign of the times. Yes, I know Otley myself. I was spent some time around the Leeds area. Half of my family were sort of Leeds. On my father remarried, and on his side, they were all miners. So suffered terribly in the miners' strike.
Yeah, well, I've got a minor strike story in the sense that we were doing stalls in Liverpool, and we used to help them collect money and stuff. And then there was a charity match, which organised by the Northern Animal Liberation League, and the press called it the Beefies versus the Beanies. And I always thought we won 2-1, but I've been told we won 3-1, but I don't know.
So what set you on your path to animal rights?
I've been asked that question a few times, and I think it goes back to I had a sense of fairness when I was a child, even down to the thing about I couldn't understand the other kids kind of smashing up telephone boxes and that kind of thing. I always thought, well, that's not fair. What if somebody needs to make a call? I mean, this was the days before people had phones in their homes and stuff, and so I always had this kind of feeling of fairness. And when I did get to the Isle of Wight, my first job as a projectionist and stuff, I remember being in the staff room and an usher killed a crane fly for no reason at all. And I thought, this is just not fair, And even at school, I remember releasing wasps who all the other children were trying to kill. And so I would jump from desk to desk, kind of trying to let them out. And so that was, I think, the low-level emotional thing. And then when I got into the movement, and especially when I started reading Tom Regan and the Case for Animal Rights, that kind of stuff, I suddenly had a philosophical understanding of my feelings. And so that's how it all kind of came together, a little bit like a recipe, I suppose.
And you joined the Hunt Sabs?
That was the first thing I did. And what appealed to me there, because I saw an advert for them in a music mag, might have been the NME, and they were asking for action and not money, And that also goes back to my sister, who was 8 years senior to me. She used to be into conservation kind of things, and she was always collecting money for the lion appeal and the elephant appeal and this kind of stuff. And there was a scandal involving the RSPCA at the time and about all the waste of money that was going on. And so I was thinking, how much of my sister's, money gets to the animals, as it were. So because the SABs were asking for action, that appealed to me. And so I entered the movement on the activist side and never regretted it in that sense, because it kind of chewed me into doing stuff, not just standing for it, I suppose.
You now deal with animal rights within society. Would that be a fair representation?
You mean? Well, yeah. I mean, I see the main problem that we face is cultural speciesism, and so yeah, I always say it. I put it this way: that nowadays we're, rather than looking for enemies to fight, we're looking for people to educate. And so that really is the key to it. If we can do something about cultural speciesism, which is the kind of power and the ideology that backs up all of animal use, if we can change that, then it would almost be like, a wall just coming down all at once. It'd be like the Berlin Wall or something. So we've got to weaken that ideology, and everything else will follow from that. And so the idea of taking the wall apart brick by brick, we've changed that kind of idea and thought, well, we've got to go for the more fundamental thing, which is the culture of society, which is, let's face it, we're talking about a very deeply speciesist culture. Everything that society does is based on the exploitation of other animals. And so that really has got to be where we target our efforts.
So some people would say that those in favour of animal rights neglect human rights. Would you say that that's the case, or would you say that as humans are part of the animal kingdom, that it's an all-inclusive?
Yeah, it is. I subscribe to David Nybert's idea about the entanglements of oppression and liberation. So it's all of the one. And that was also the view of the people who formed the vegan social movement in 1944. And so, yeah, it's all kind of entangled. Even Tom Reagan said, it's not a question of picking and choosing. You can do it all in the sense that justice for all, really. Some people use the word that has become controversial, but now I just prefer to say that things are entangled, and but there's no reason why we can't be concerned about animal rights and human rights, because we're not really going to get one without the other. We talk about things like intersectionality, but as I said, that has become quite a controversial term. Well, it's interesting because it's become controversial everywhere now, not just in the way it's used in the animal movement, which is quite interesting. But I think Kimberly Crenshaw, who came up with the idea, she was an academic and she expected that the idea would be applied elsewhere. I mean, that's what academics do. But this application has proved to be controversial. So a lot of people have started to move away from the concept. But the idea, which existed before, but in different names, like kind of modes of domination and logic of domination, this kind of thing, just basically means that if you've got a society that dominates one type, be them humans or other animals, they're liable to dominate and exploit all of them. And so that means that you've got to take it all down at once as well.
Yeah, they don't. There seems to be a link between people who go on to abuse people by starting with abusing other animals first.
Yeah, there's a very strong kind of research suggestion that is true. There's virtually no cases where, if you like, they didn't start out with other animals, and then, as it were, progress as it would be seen in the in the kind of research to human beings. Because from an animal rights point of view, it's just an indication of a problem right from the start.
In advocating for a vegan world, do you feel that the conversation is somewhat shifted towards climate and the effects that animal agriculture have on the climate? Do you feel that that's clouding the issue, or do you feel like it's a good entry point?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I know there's this kind of gateway kind of argument, but I think the bigger issue is not climate, because veganism has always been interested in the environmental issues. I mean, let's face it, in bold sense, the environment is the habitat of other animals. So vegans have always been interested in that. The real problem is the fact that a lot of people orient towards veganism as a diet. That's more destructive than them thinking of the environment. But in terms of kind of gateway, the research suggests, there's not a lot of it, but there is some research, suggests that doesn't really matter why people come into the movement. Could even be health reasons, right? But if they don't engage with the ethics and as early as possible, which is the advantageous thing, then there's a problem. So non-vegans, the opponents of vegans, they delight in saying that there's some research that suggests that 80% of people stop being vegan. That's not entirely technically true. It basically means that about 80% of people stop being plant-based. The people who actually become vegan, in other words, ethical vegans, they tend to stay vegan. But they're the people who have kind of, if you like, just stayed on the health path, and they've never really engaged with the ethics. And if you do that, it's a problem. If you do engage with the ethics, then you've got this situation of, people say, how easy is it? Is it difficult? These kind of things. And of course, if you've got an ethical reason to do something, then you find a way around that. Those concerns are not as big as if that's your chief concern about, how difficult is it? What about my next meal and this kind of stuff. If you've got the ethics first, we've got a whole series of banners which say, before you ask how, ask why. And if you get the why, then the how is a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's fundamental, really. And as you say about the diet aspect, there seems to, in my mind, there seems to have been a massive increase in vegan activity. But that seems to be conflated with the plant-based diet. There's a lot more of a shift towards a plant-based diet, but not necessarily towards a vegan ethos or towards the fundamental philosophy.
Yeah, my concern is to make sure that people know the fundamental philosophy, and that's why I'm interested in talking about the history of the movement, so people have got that kind of philosophical, kind of ethical kind of base to their knowledge about veganism. Yeah, otherwise we could have a problem. I suppose the big increase in recent years with vegan activism, I suppose most of that you would call that actual vegan activism rather than plant-based promotion. But all of this is taking place within a capitalist situation. And so obviously what you've got then is you've got kind of capitalistic industries looking, and they've identified a plant-based market now, and they're kind of exploring it, exploiting it and everything. And so it's kind of inevitable that would happen, that once you get an increase in people identifying as vegan or identifying as plant-based, you're going to get companies moving in to try and exploit that market. The benefit of that actually is the fact that they have started to use the word vegan. And so you see the word vegan on all the products and in all the supermarkets and that kind of stuff. And that's had a really good effect on the movement, because until around about, well, I mean, it's only a few years ago, but say, just as a rough figure, 10 years ago, most of the movement, if we're thinking about the national or international groups, they were pretty terrified of the word vegan. So they would use words like veggie and veg instead, this is our veggie starter kit and this kind of stuff. Now they're kind of promoting veganism. And so it's almost like the supermarkets and society has pushed the movement into realizing that veganism is not a scare word. I think the grassroots have been saying that to the movement for years and years and years, but they were always wary. Don't kind of upset the vegetarians. What about the flexitarians? What about the reducitarians? They were always think, because those are the donors. So it was all to do with money. With the grassroots, it's to do with the message. And so now we've got a situation where everybody really is talking about veganism, but there is also a push to kind of redefine it as plant-based, and then there's another push to redefine it as something like a militant version of the RSPCA, which is very worrying for me. You get a lot of people now, even influencers and people with a lot of influence in the movement and elsewhere, talking about veganism is about reducing suffering. And it's not. It's about the abolition of animal use. And it always has been. Right back in the 1950s, they were talking about, this is the pioneers, they were saying, we're on the side of the liberators. We're not about welfare, we're about liberation. They had a strong kind of revolutionary outlook. And to some extent, that's moderated, which in social movement theory sense is what happens to movements. When they grow bigger, they tend to moderate. And it has happened to the vegan movement. But we've got to try to make sure that it doesn't happen too much. Otherwise, the core values of veganism could be lost forever.
Yes, I often worry about that myself. Excuse me. I do remember that very much the V word being tantamount to a swear word, or certainly a very scary thing. And I think that came from people like us who are older. I know you've got years on me, but I think that came from the only people who were vegan were animal rights activists. And animal rights activists were often portrayed as scary terrorist movements, etc., etc. So the V word, the word vegan was aligned with that, and that made a lot of more of the mainstream movement shy away from using that word.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think some people have got a problem with fundamental values. In other words, moral consistency is actually something that you would think is a valued commodity, but it's actually not. People are actually a bit scared about that. Tom Reagan articulates that in a wonderful speech he did in 1988, and he said that we get called extremists, and he said, but I am an extremist if you mean I'm against it all the time. He said, I'm against sexual violence all the time. I'm against child molestation all the time. The abuse of the elderly all the time. If that means extremist, then I'm an extremist. But I think some people do worry about coming over as fundamental. But if fundamental just means morally consistent, there's nothing wrong with that. You've almost like got to argue the case and say, well, not being morally consistent is not a good thing, which it isn't.
No, I think within media, particularly, the use of language is often distorted. I mean, take the word anarchy, for instance. Anarchy is really the fundamentals of democracy, but you wouldn't think it to read anything in the media.
Yeah, well, obviously, if you think about things like religious fundamentals, it's a negative, right? But in terms of moral fundamentalism, that's a good thing.
So now, obviously, you're still pursuing your outreach. I know that you were at the gala. Was that last week or a couple of days ago?
Yes, it was. 2 days ago.
And so, also with your outreach, you've got the Vegan Time Tunnel, which I'm quite an avid watcher of, and Still Alive with you and Ronnie, which superb title.
The title was Ronnie's idea because we've got a great closing to the show now, because we say, well, we'll see you next week if we are, and then Ronnie goes, still alive. So it's quite a nice little ending, really. But of course, what it's really doing is, you see, I'm quite keen on busting vegan stereotypes. We've got no sense of humor. People kind of drop out after 7 years and this kind of. In fact, it's really interesting. You'll like this. There was an influencer, and he recently kind of announced that he'd been vegan for 7 years, and it was kind of, wow, that's amazing, but this is the kind of, if you like, the base of the movement can be quite young. And there is this kind of myth going around that long-term veganism is not a thing. And of course it is. And so we're kind of playing with that kind of idea. Ronnie is vegan 51 years. I'm vegan 44 years. We know John Cross, who's Leslie Cross's son. He's been vegan for 80 years. Ronnie knows quite a lot of people who have been vegan for more than 50 years. So the idea that veganism is a young person's thing and also short term is not entirely true. It's just that, you've got some anti-vegans, like vegan deterioration and all that. And they play on this idea that, well, you can do it for 5 years, but then your health is going to deteriorate and that kind of stuff, which is not true.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people within my circle, I tell a lie, I have two circles. I have a circle of people that are all quite young and brilliant animal rights activists and vegans. And then there's the people who are around me naturally. They're all, we're all 30-odd year vegans. And it's quite surprising, because within our circle, we don't even think about the amount of time that you've been vegan. And then you find yourself talking to one of the youngers, and they say, oh yeah, I've been vegan for 5 years. How long have you been vegan for? And you tell them, and they're just blown away by the concept that you're still doing it. You've still, how could you survive that long? How can you still be here, still doing it? I think possibly that's because of the resurgence and people feeling like it's a new, fresh thing.
Another myth, though, is that, veganism must have been virtually impossible back then. Of course, it wasn't. I mean, fruit and vegetables are the basis of the plant-based diet. and they were always available. And so what tends to happen is that the conversation is almost about the vegan meats and the vegan cheeses and all that. But even back then in the 1980s, you had those, or you could make your own cheese. It wasn't as kind of barren as people think, in that sense. But people almost like think, oh, I suppose it's when you think about things like socializing, eating out, going to a restaurant, that was more difficult than it is now. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, I often joke with people about that because people will still maintain that becoming vegan or taking on a vegan diet is a difficult thing. And I always say, well, we come from back in the day when there was nothing to eat, nothing to drink, nowhere to go, and no one to talk to.
Who wants to talk to a vegan?
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a dagger in the courtyard. There's a bolt gun with your name. Move along, there's nothing to see here. All the pain is swept away. What does it take to be bloodless? Feast on the flora, not the fauna. At least you are not destined for the gun or the gas chamber. Release the harmless to a sanctuary. Let them live in peace. Morrissey said, meat is murder. Be brave and careful what you eat. What does it take to be bloodless? Feast on the flora, not the fauna. At least you are not destined for the gun or the gas chamber. Enjoy your flesh. More of a man than I, to prey on the weak. You savage, you justify. What does it take to be bloodless? Feast on the flora, not the fauna. At least you are not destined for the gun or the gas chamber. What does it take to be bloodless? Feast on the flora, not the fauna. At least you are not destined for the gun or the gas chamber. For the gun or the gas chamber.
Now, unlike some other islands out there, we want you to have some things that are actually worth having for survival. So we give you a complete botanical encyclopedia which will enable you to forage for all the plants available to eat across the globe, and of course a boat, in order for you to venture away from the island and continue your journey into the ocean of opportunity for self-development and vegan outreach. You also get to take one book, one website address that you can recommend to fellow travellers, and your own personal must-have vegan item in order to keep your spirits up and strengthen your resolve. So firstly, what book would you like to take with you on your journey, and why?
Well, it's a hard choice, and I'm always tempted to pick something from David Nybert, but I've got to go really with Tom Reagan. And normally, what I say is, rather than his kind of groundbreaking text from '83, The Case for Animal Rights, I normally say Defending Animal Rights from 2001. But on this occasion, I think I probably would take The Case, just on the grounds that it's quite dense philosophically. It takes a bit of time to really get into it. And so it would be a great a great thing to keep revisiting, and it would keep me busy for ages. So I think I'll take The Case for Animal Rights by Tom Regan, 1983.
So would you like to explain a bit of the context within that book? Excuse me.
Yeah, well, credited to really be the first time we have a rights-based theory of animal rights, essentially. And I use the phrase rights-based animal rights, which is a bit of a mouthful. It's just that within the animal rights movement, the word rights is used rhetorically without any philosophical depth. Now, the case provides that philosophical depth. And so it's actually rights-based. It takes rights seriously. It suggests that other animals are rights bearers, that they're rights holders, which means that what we do to them when we use them is a rights violation. And so this is kind of an abolitionist idea, moves completely away from welfarist ideas, which are based on things like don't be cruel, have mercy, minimize suffering and all that. The case is an abolitionist thing that says, no, it's not about moving away from animal use or reforming it so it's a bit nicer. It's about ending animal use completely. And one of the kind of main slogans of Tom Regan was things like, we're not looking for larger cages, we're looking for empty cages. So it was the first statement of abolition. It was about 10 years, or at least a few years later than Animal Liberation, which is the famous book by Peter Singer in the movement. But that's not an abolitionist book, and it's also not a rights-based book. In fact, in Animal Liberation, Singer said that he can't really see a philosophical or moral argument against free-range egg production, for example. These ideas, come into the movement quite a lot. Melanie Joy, even in 2010, said that we can procure eggs and dairy without violence. So there are these kind of utilitarian non-rights ideas which are very prevalent in the movement. Reagan was the one that set the benchmark in terms of abolition. No, the idea is to end it, not reform it or tinker with it. And so that appeals to me a lot.
So you have the opportunity to take one website address with you to pass on to fellow travellers. What would you like to do there?
Yeah, well, I'd probably take goveganworld.com, which is Irish-based. In fact, it used to be called Go Vegan Ireland. The interesting thing about that is that you could regard it as a transnational group in the sense that their reach is transnational, but it's also very kind of grassroots. There's not many staff. All the money that they gain and generate goes into the campaigning. So it doesn't kind of create a corporation. There's far too many corporations in this movement, which kind of hold the money. And that money needs to be being actively used, not just kind of held. And so Go Vegan World kind of almost like personifies that for me, in the sense that all their money goes for outreach. And the form of outreach they do is these big billboard campaigns, which have generated quite a lot of press, TV, radio, media coverage. The farmers, in particular, really hate it because of the messaging. It's non-graphic, so it's very educational. Their leaflets are brilliant for things like door dropping. So Go Vegan World would be where I go there.
Brilliant. And finally, you get to have with you your own personal must-have vegan item to take with you, just to keep your spirits up and help your resolve. So what vegan item would you like to take with you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the vegan bit that's tripping me up a little bit. But I mean, in terms of comfort, I'm going to say comfortable underwear. Am I allowed to go there? Comfortable underwear.
I think you can go there, as long as you don't get graphic.
Well, at my age, comfy underwear, particularly socks and stuff, are very important. So,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of socks myself, definitely. There's nothing worse than wet socks.
yeah, wet socks. I remember sabbing days, hair coursing and especially grouse shooting, but just kind of, running through ploughed fields and stuff. Everybody ends up in the van on the way back, and their feet are very uncomfortable. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, wrinkly feet. Well, I think that about concludes our interview for today. It's been wonderful speaking to you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again.
Well, thanks for having me.
So now all that remains for us to do is for me to thank you again for coming and visiting me on the island, and for you to climb aboard your wonderfully crafted vessel and sail off into the sunset to continue on your journey towards a fully vegan planet. Thanks once again to Roger Yates from the Vegan Information Project. All the links to find him are in the description. And as Roger sails away on their brand new adventure, I'd just like to say a special thank you to Sophia, Fletcher, Vystopia and Tom Ewings for providing today's music. Links for all of them are available in the description. That's all for now on Vegan Island Radio. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment if you wish. And if you would like to help maintain the island, why not click on the Patreon link and see what you can do to help out. Thanks once again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next Sunday and see who else washes up on our shores.
the Arque Experience. Hello, Roger.
Hello, Ark.
Are you ready for your questions?
Yes, fire away.
If you ruled the world, what would be the first thing that you changed?
Everything. I would, I would change the values of the world. In vegan terms, the first question that we ask, this is a bit kind of anarchic really, but the first question we ask is something like, is this just? Is this right? Is this okay? Rather than, is this profitable? Because in the world we've got now, it's all to do with instrumental reason, using others as resources and instruments. I would change that. We don't want to see each other like that, but that is a product of our values. So I would change fundamental values. That's what I'd change.
After the ALF released 5,000 mink into the British countryside, what lessons do you think have been learned, if any?
Yes, well, the release of minks have been very controversial within the ALF for many years. The lesson really would possibly be release them into the compound and destroy the cages and not release them into the environment. Because the sad fact is that most of them stay around the farm. Quite a lot of them get killed on the roads around because they're not used to traffic. In fact, the vehicles that they're used to, just crawl along usually. So they're just not used to traffic as we know it. And then if they do manage to spread elsewhere, then they find an environment full of free-living minks as well. So then they end up having to have fights with those and everything else. So possibly of all the ALF activities, the release of mink is the least well thought out in terms of its consequences. So I suppose the lesson is, bluntly, you could say don't do it or do it in a different way.
Have you ever crimped your hair?
I don't know whether it was crimped. I in the 70s, I had very long hair. In fact, I could reach around the back and grab my hair when I was at school. And so one time I did have a curly perm, Mark Bolan style, but I'm not quite sure if that's really crimping, but it was perming, I suppose.
What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Yes. Well, that's for when I'm looking for the Holy Grail. Well, I believe you've got to be a king to know that, and because I'm not a king, I don't really know. So I have to pass on that, I'm afraid.
Who is your favourite musician or band?
It's Mark Bolan and T-Rex or Tyrannosaurus Rex in the early days, even John's Children in even the earlier days. And so I've always had a soft spot for T-Rex. If I had to analyse why, I'd have difficulty. It's just the vibe of it just suits me for some reason. I just love it, really.
Is there anything you would change about your past?
Yeah, well, that's actually a difficult question for me in the sense that, I come from a pretty dysfunctional family and, so I suppose my family relations have never been that good. I don't want to get into psychiatrist's chair mode here, but again, I'm not quite sure whether I would change that in the sense that I don't believe in the ideology of the family either. But I suppose, my own relationship with my own children, for example, I would probably change things about that, if I'm honest. I've always been really involved so much with the movement. I suppose you could argue, and it would be true, that I've neglected other things. So I'd change that, but if I had to repeat it, I'd kind of still be as involved in the movement as I am now. So, yeah, as I said, it's not an easy question, that, for me.
What are you scared of?
I'm scared of a non-vegan world, possibly. I don't know. That's another difficult one. Yeah, I mean, I'm not scared of things like dying. I think I'm more scared of things like the process of it, and if it's going to be long times of pain and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to have a half pass on that one as well. Another difficult question, that one.
What is the weirdest thing you found in your garden?
Well, I don't have a garden, but there's a kind of communal garden outside, and there's a palm tree in it. Is that weird? I actually would say nowadays things like the lack of insects and bees is the weirdest thing, in the sense that I remember as a kid, finding newts and frogs, and I always had a thing about bulrushes and stuff. And I think that the change in that sense, that we seem to have done so much damage to the environment, that we seem to have lost so much. And I think that's possibly the answer. And that's probably a bit more serious than you expected, but that's it.
What gets you up in the morning?
Well, I suppose people are going to be glib and say alarm clock or something, aren't they, there? But I suppose my driving force is the movement, always has been. I always kind of tend to see the world through the lens of the animal movement. So that's it, really, in the sense that when I wake up, that's my first thoughts, kind of what is it today that I'm doing within the movement. So, yeah, it's this burdensome movement that I'm in. That's what gets me up in the morning and drives me to bed at night time.
That concludes the Arque Experience. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much for having me.